Hello and welcome back to another episode of This Round is on Me. If you're in the restaurant industry anywhere in the world, chances are very high that you've heard of my guest today, or at least the incredibly successful brand that he's built in the fiercely competitive market of London. He is Karan Gokani, co-founder and creative director of the much-lauded Sri Lankan restaurant Hoppers. But he's not just passionate about cooking. He's collaborated with the likes of Shake Shack and Suneva Kiri, and even made a few TV appearances cooking up a storm. And as if he didn't have enough going on, he's now the proud author of Hoppers, the Cookbook, a recipe tome that pays homage to the restaurant and Sri Lankan cuisine. You can see now why I want to pick his brains, so we'll be right back after a quick break.
Hey everyone, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. We have a special announcement. Introducing Club Paisa Vaisa, where you get episodes of Paisa Vaisa 3 days before release, bonus and ad-free content, and access to the full show archive. So get your yearly membership today for only rupees $6.99. Log on to club.ivmpodcast.com/Paisa Vaisa. On Cock and Bull, Cyrus is joined by Shreyas Manohar and comedian Masoom Rajwani. Shreyas shares a crime fiction story that couldn't take off, plus they discuss a story of Santas getting assaulted while driving tanks and much more. On the Advertiser's Guide to the Galaxy, Karthik talks about the creative device in the field of advertising involving financial brands. On The Origin of Things, Deepak tells the origin story of a popular song that deals with glamour, wealth, egos, and insecurities. On the Habit Coach's Know Your Coach series, we get to ask Ashton about his sleep routine and the regime he follows for a good night's sleep. And on Smarter with Sid, Siddharth dwells into the mysterious world of the hive mind, explaining how groups can create a collective consciousness and how it can lead to both good and bad outcomes. Once again, do not forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcast.com. We have some super cool and exciting stuff over there for you and your loved ones. Follow us on social media. We are at IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you like our shows, then do spread the word. You know, it really helps us a lot. And of course, do not forget to rate and review our shows wherever you are listening to them. You can also find all our video shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcasts. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week, Capgemini and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome to the show, Karan. Fabulous to have you here finally. I know we've been talking about this for ages, so welcome.
So excited to be here and can't wait to hear this, Gauri. I have been listening to your podcast religiously over the last few years. It's kept me company on many cycle rides, kept me abreast with what's happening back home. Oddly enough, I still call Bombay home. We'll obviously chat about that.
Yeah.
And it's so cool to be sitting with you in this new life of ours, because we were, school friends and we've known each other since.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that it's really funny. But, you and I have had a very similar journey. So we're both Mumbaikars, born and bred, went to the same school coincidentally, I know a few years apart, went on to study law at university in the UK.
I know.
And actually worked in sort of a professional capacity for a while before doing a complete 180-degree pivot and venturing into hospitality and F&B. And what are the chances, huh? It turned out to be a funny coincidence, right?
There we go. We've got a sort of topic for the next podcast, so we can host together career changes.
What to do when exactly.
When you're bored of law.
So, obviously I know most listeners know the story behind my transition because, I've talked about it a lot in the past. But tell us about yours and what made you do this switch.
Yeah, so I think I was a proper sucker for punishment. I did 2 degrees of law. So I did my first undergrad degree at Government Law College here in Mumbai, straight out of school. And then I moved on, went to the UK and did a second degree there at Cambridge University. I did 3 years there, then, sort of followed the natural progression and went on to do the LPC, which is what you need to do there to be a solicitor. Found a job at a Magic Circle firm called Linklaters, worked there for about 4 years, so qualified. And the whole idea there was, it's a bit like you get out of school, you go into university, what's the next thing everyone is doing? And then when I looked back, it just felt a bit contrived. I just wanted to do something myself. I wanted to do something. I'm very kinesthetic, wanted to create something, do something. And this just didn't feel like the real world. Plus, I was massively bored doing what I was doing. And I think I knew all along that food, I used to call it food, but now I call it hospitality, was a profession that I just loved. ever since I was a kid, we used to go and eat at all kinds of restaurants in Bombay, but somewhere we visited, and growing up here, South Bombay President was somewhere we went to all the time. And I remember Chef Ananda was a very dear friend. And I'd always joke with him, even as a kid, Dad would joke with him saying, take him into your kitchen. He loves cooking so much at home and stuff. And I think I cooked since I was 4 years old. So our first Diwali while I was at law school here, I just went up to him one day. We were at, I think, Thai Pavilion or Trattoria. And I said, Chef, I want to come and work. He said, yeah, come. And I think I spent that entire Diwali in the kitchen. Loved it. But I think the one thing it taught me was at that stage, I didn't want to get into cooking professionally. And that kind of thing, that lingered in my head. Then I moved to England, did this. Even then, I think I was cooking more in my dorm room at Cambridge than I was actually reading law or studying law, And it was a joke. We were 8 of us, all boys, in this dorm. And we had a shared kitchen. The first thing I did was negotiate fridge space. So went in there and I said, listen, guys, you will get a free meal every now and then as long as I can have all your shelves. So I had about 4 shelves of this fridge and they had one drawer that the other 7 shared.
That's a pretty sweet deal.
It was. And then, like sometimes I'd go in there, I'd be cooking from morning to evening on a Saturday. And these guys would come in. I had this the Austrian guy who stayed there. He'd make his meager breakfast. Then he'd come in and have a quick lunch. And he'd come in like 6 o'clock in the evening and have his cheese and meat and, bread. And he's like, you've been cooking all day. What's up? So I was like, I'm doing a fancy dinner and I've invited friends over. It's something that, I loved. And I think it was only after a lot of introspection, a lot of the sort of lows that bring you to your ups in that legal career that I said, what is it I want to do? And it's only when I took that deep dive into hospitality for the first time that I realized that there's actually so much you can do. You don't have to be just a chef or a restaurant manager.
Tell me about
There's
it.
a lot in between. And sometimes you do all of it together.
Yeah.
And today I just find that's why I sort of came up with this whole thing of, creative director. But what do? You do everything, because everything you do, you can make creative. Whether it's the way something is served on your table, whether it's the way your service staff talks to people. And that's something I've really come to appreciate, because first you think food is all about cooking, secret recipes.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I've written all our recipes in this book here, but secret recipes, creating menus, but it's not that. That's, as Danima says, that's like 20% of it, 30% of it. The rest of it is the magic and the heart you pour into it, into your team, who then does that.
The
for
hospitality, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, I mean, look, that's amazing. And clearly you had this flair and love for cooking. And while you said that you didn't want to get into it professionally, I mean, was culinary school never something that, just even out of the love of cooking that you wanted to explore?
100%. That was the first thing I started thinking of. I was like, what's the most natural way out of law into this? But I think there were 2 factors. One was I was slightly older. At the point, I'd looked at chefs who had made it and they were already 10 years younger. So I was like, by the time I get through school and then eventually make a mark, it was different. Second thing was that whole experience at President. Looking back at those guys, that made me think, okay, fine, let me just revisit this in today's mindset. And worked on the weekends at really good kitchens across London. And these were sort of Michelin star Indian restaurants.
And they were happy
stuff.
to have you even without that.
They were like, there's no
yeah.
threat whatsoever. This
Yeah.
guy's a lawyer. Where's he ever going to make it in here? They're like, please come
Free
in.
labor.
And
Yeah.
those guys are great. I literally chopped onions, Gauri. And,
Yeah.
and it was a funny thing because I'd spend all a Saturday, Sunday, come out smelling of the Indian kitchen, which is such a different life from what law in a sterile, magic circle environment is. I'd come in on a Monday morning and there'd be people complaining, oh my God, the weekend wasn't long enough. We're so tired, so hungover. I was like, actually putting into perspective how much one of us as a trainee solicitor earns, the entire kitchen earns sometimes. And those guys work so hard, the way they look after each other. I remember there was this incident where one of the chefs, it was a team of 6 chefs in a kitchen there, really well-respected kitchen. One of them had gone to India on his long sort of 1-month holiday, come back with his family. 3 of them in their break, they left. They went to pick this guy up from the airport with food from the kitchen, took him home, settled him in and came back. I was like, sometimes even the best of friends don't do that. But that camaraderie actually makes you feel like another analogy that's come up again and again in my head and, in this industry is it's a bit like a band of brothers. It's a bit like war in some respects, when service begins. And that bond you have, that team sport that hospitality is incredible.
No, it's true.
And that's something that keeps me buzzed all the time.
I feel like they're my family. I mean, more family than family sometimes, and it really is, it's a bond that's hard to describe. And maybe it happens in a lot of sort of work environments, but I think hospitality has a whole different. It's also it takes a certain kind of personality to
100%.
excel in hospitality, and I think that translates into all interactions, even outside of work.
100%.
Yeah.
You've got to eat, breathe, love it, because it's not a profession that's going to give you tons of cash. Even if you do it smartly. And it's a profession that gives you an innate satisfaction, just seeing a smile on someone's face, including your own staff's face to begin with. So to answer your your previous question, I did then revisit that, and I think that consolidated in my head that I don't want to go back into a professional kitchen environment and be a chef, because I've also got ADHD, I'm sure, undiagnosed. But I can't stick to one thing, and I'm like hyper creative. I'll keep, suddenly have these random ideas and want to create them. So I was like, how do I infuse that into every element?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's the decor, whether it's the service, whether it's the food, whether it's how it's served,
The marketing, everything.
whether it's next steps. So now my role is much more about, what do we do next? How do we keep the team? How do I keep myself on my toes? Because you could just sit back and say, okay, I'll just open one more and then, just make them slicker and slicker. But then you build a team to actually do that, and you go on to, okay, what do I do next? So for me, it's about that. I need to have that next project.
Challenge.
The next challenge. And I think it's very project-based as well,
Yeah.
right? Restaurants. So I need to have that.
But I mean, obviously, like quitting
going
your
forward.
job and opening the uber successful Hoppers, what was that? How did that happen? I mean, you've clearly discovered and made South Indian and Sri Lankan food really shine. How did that piece of the puzzle?
I mean, look,
fit
I'm
in?
not going to take credit for that individually. I think there are a lot of stars that aligned. The first step was obviously looking for an opportunity in hospitality to understand the industry better.
So did
And
you work in a restaurant
So I actually
before?
moved back to India,
Mhm.
and I spent a year working with the Old World Hospitality Indian Accent Group with Rohit Khattar one-on-one. I have huge respect for him. I came and met so many restaurateurs. I'm not going to name names. I met restaurateurs, I met hoteliers, I met people associated with the business here, and the first thing they tell you is, oh no, don't waste your time doing it. I was like, but you've just spent your whole life doing this. You've been fairly successful. That's why I'm coming to meet you. Why would you give that advice to someone? So that's advice I never give to someone. I'll listen to the person. I'll always say, look, these are the pros and cons. This might be a bit dreamy, but dreams are good. Dreams are what make us, right? So I was like, carry on with the dream, but maybe, refine it in a certain sense. The people who never answered my call, and that's a great thing. It pushed me a lot to do what I eventually ended up doing. But Rohit was someone who welcomed me with open arms. He taught me so much.
We've learned from the best. There's no doubt about that.
I got involved in a lot of his ventures, not just Indian Accent. Actually, Indian Accent was just periphery. I have huge respect for Manish and what he did. Great thing was most of our meetings were at Indian Accent, so we ate some of the best food. Spent a year with him, and in that year I was dating my now wife, who along with her brothers have opened a very, very successful group of restaurants, JKS restaurants. So Jyotin, Karam and Sunena. And they already had, some very successful restaurants. Gymkhana was on the rise. They had done really well. When I eventually got married and decided to move back to England because I'd been there long enough. She's obviously grown up there. They had a successful setup there. And, the conversation we had was, look, I'm in this industry. Instead of working with someone else, why not work together? And we'd come up with something. So went there. There was a consultancy project they had in Copenhagen, which I took over just to not to be stepping on family toes and stuff. And Karam and I then got chatting about a concept he had in his mind. So he wanted to do Sri Lankan, I wanted to do South Indian. Coincidentally, I had most of my best friends at university and law school were Sri Lankan, and now I had found myself sort of going back and forth to Sri Lanka many times. I'd fallen in love with the people more than the food at that stage. I loved the food. And I thought that it's this interesting, fascinating sort of step away from Kerala food, something I'd grown up eating because of one of my granduncles in Bombay. And, it's a food that we're fairly familiar with. So it all kind of aligned. We got chatting at my wedding in Kerala. And then we started working on the concept. We traveled to Sri Lanka, did a, in-depth tour, started thinking about menus and stuff. And I've always maintained that Sri Lankan, that Hoppers is as much about South Indian food as it is about Sri Lankan. But obviously the media loved the
Sri Lankan story.
Sri Lankan story and the hook. So they sold us a Sri Lankan restaurant. We've got some amazingly unique Sri Lankan dishes. We've got some very, very authentic South Indian dishes. And then there's a confluence of the two with, creativity added on. Like, say, for instance, a smoked pork pork rib dish we do with tamarind. And it's kithul and tamarind and ginger, and it's incredible. But
I mean,
that's
I'm
sort
sure
of,
there's
that's
a lot
come in
of
from
yeah.
stuff that I've ended up doing in later years, like cooking on live fire at festivals and things like that. So,
I'm sure there's a lot of like overlap in the cuisine and the flavor profile. So it makes sense. I mean,
100%.
yeah.
And and the food itself is unique.
Yeah.
In its look, a hopper is completely different from a naan. And even the Sri Lankan hopper is completely different from an appam.
I was going to say it's more like an appam.
It's similar in principle, but actually they are quite different. So appam
There's
is quite
subtle
flat and
differences.
soft, whereas a hopper is crisper on the edges, and it's made in a deeper bowl. So it looks very iconic and very different. And then there are tons of unique, like they have a black pork curry. They do something called a lamp rice, which is one of my favorite things. It's a banana leaf parcel with all kinds of curries and rice inside. So there's a lot of food, but we researched that, went into like in-depth research, did that whole thing, and then Hopper's, the first site is a tiny. If you've seen it, but
Yeah.
if for listeners who haven't been, it's a tiny 40-seat restaurant, including a bar. And when I say 40 seats, it's including it's this sort of bar seating, ledge seating everywhere. And we opened that purely with a thing of let's just do this. Let's bring this kind of food, let's bring this kind of hospitality to this space we've now been lucky enough to find in the heart of Soho, and we'll see where it goes. And from then on, there's been a lot of reverse engineering to grow the brand,
Yeah.
which has happened one step at a time. We've now got 3 restaurants in London, 1 abroad, and the first cookbook. So it's been a really interesting journey, and I don't think any of it was sort of planned. We just took it on as
Went
it came.
with the flow. Yeah.
Went with the flow, and it's been great fun.
But I mean, identifying sort of South Indian / Sri Lankan food and doing a restaurant concept around that. I mean, I lived in London for almost 10 years, and I can't say I remember many restaurants doing that cuisine.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a clear sort of gap in the market that you guys identified, or what was the sort of thought process behind that specific cuisine and doing it in London?
So, like I said, I think it was a confluence. I as a student, I ate tons of dosas, and either you got average ones or you had to travel out into eating it in a very sort of different kind of environment. And Karam, who's very good at identifying these kind of things in the next trend before you even know it, was very keen on the Sri Lankan side of things. And then we got chatting. And like I said, I think a restaurant is only about 20-30% food. The rest of it is the environment, the heart and soul that goes into it. You can even copy the decor like for like, and you can copy the menu. But that heart that's in a restaurant, which is very hard to tell, and it might sound philosophical, but those are restaurants that have continued, like Table.
Yeah.
These are restaurants that have remained successful and remain on brand because there's a individual and there's a group of individuals behind it that infuse their personality and love into it.
Yeah.
So it's people think there's this whole random thing of I'm putting love into restaurants, but it isn't. There's a lot more than love. There's a thought process, but you've got to really live your brand. So I think we did that early on. There was Sunena and I were on the floor for the first 2 months.
What's it like working with your wife?
With my wife, I mean, the good thing is you fight about it, you take it to bed, but both of us are hugely passionate about what we do and actually complement each other pretty well, where she's more on the sort of, she's very practical. I'm very creative. I'm very impractical sometimes.
Oh my
So
God,
I
this
will bring
sounds like Jay
things.
and me. I just had him on the show a couple of weeks ago, and it's exactly that.
But you need that
yeah,
person.
you do need that. Yeah.
Who you have that faith in and belief in.
Who brings you down?
Because sometimes you get really pissed off.
Yeah.
If someone brings you down, you
Yeah.
just get really angry and are like, no,
brings
I'm
you
not
down
gonna
to
do it.
earth, not brings you down, period. But like,
Yes,
just
brings you
kind
down
of like
sometimes also.
shows you the practical
But it's
side
good.
once in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we definitely have a great relationship there where, she can be my biggest critic, but she's also the most important one. Where I will always, like, in the middle of a flight, I suddenly get ideas and I'll be like, okay, what do you think of this? And she's good at that. She'll hear me out. She's like, yeah. Because some ideas she knows will just pass. As soon as you land, it'll be like, that was terrible. I just say it to myself. So she'll just hear me out. So, and then some where she thinks it's good, we'll start brainstorming. So we actually created the entire front of house experience from scratch. And that was actually the biggest challenge. So food you can bring, we got some great chefs in. So there was Karam in the kitchen, me between the kitchen and front, and Sue on the front. And it was, for a month we were in this tight environment, fighting, killing each other, but still loving that high of having opened this restaurant that on the first day had a queue that was about 300 meters long. And it was great fun.
Amazing.
But I think for me, the real learning experience there, and a huge one, was that that front of house experience that you give someone is so, so important.
Yeah.
Because you always take that for granted. But we wanted to create something, and this is again said very often, that you want to create this whole thing of an experience, inviting people into a home. And we kind of had that. And we had no reservations. So it was queue only. Initially physical queue for the first 2 months. Then we had too many fights, so we went to virtual queue. But we were one of the pioneers in doing that virtual queue. Now there are tons of restaurants in London that do the virtual queue. We had shared tables, which is again in that London environment, but people loved it. And again, that came from a place, yes, being commercially efficient, in order to keep the prices low and keep it accessible, because accessibility for me is probably my most important value at Hoppers. But the other thing was also about, for me, the most memorable experiences are where I end up chatting to a team member, but more importantly from a fellow guest.
Yeah.
Imagine like how many meals, we remember meals, but we don't remember what we ate. But sometimes you remember the meals because of all those things that happened around.
100%. I mean, we have that, like that was the whole idea behind our community table as well. And some of my closest friends now are people I just stumbled across sitting next to them at that
Precisely.
table. And it's priceless. I mean, it's something that, connecting over food, I mean, as cliche as that sounds, is really one of those very special things that you can't kind of, I don't know how it works, but it just does work, and it's really important. And I agree. Like the hospitality aspect of a restaurant is what can make or break it. And a lot of people will forgive mistakes, will forgive accidents, things like that, if there's genuine and good hospitality, right? It's
just an honesty.
Yeah.
About doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
So again, like for me, hospitality is not a two-way street. It's not just us giving, you taking, or even giving back. But it's a very important element of creating a space. So for example, one of my favorite memories, is a story I've told so many times, even when I'm recruiting staff and, in my own head, asking myself what values do I want, is we had, in the early days of Hoppers, the long queues and stuff out the door, very, very busy. We wanted the quick turnover. We had a shared table, so a table of 4 where you had 2 couples actually sitting across each other. No gap or anything in between, so they'd chat to each other. And then there was a little gap, and then there was a table of 2, which is probably the only table of 2 facing each other in the restaurant. So you had a slightly older couple sitting on a table. When I say older, I'm not going to say ages, but slightly older, and then a slightly younger couple, probably in their sort of late teens. Actually, not late teens, probably in their 20s, sitting next to them. And these guys have been chatting a little bit to each other. In the end, I think one of my senior team members, who was very close to us, she brought the bill and presented to the younger couple. The older couple, the guy reached over, took this. So we served in a coconut shell. He reached over, took this, and he's like, I'm going to pay for them. And she just found this amazing. And she had shared the same values as us. She's found it amazing. And she went to them and she said, sure. And then they looked at them and they said, look, when we were your age, we'd gone out on a date and another couple had footed the bill just randomly like this. And we'd been chatting with you through the meal. And we've always wanted to return the favor. Now, these guys, despite the queue out, they stayed on for about 2 hours afterwards, well into the afternoon after we had shut, just buying each other drinks.
That's crazy.
And just sitting here and chatting. Now, they will not remember who served them. They might not remember what the restaurant looked like, but they'll have a warm feeling about it. They'll probably not remember what they ate because this was back in 2016. But they will remember Hoppers.
There'll be a memory for
and
sure.
I think, I just love the fact that we have played a role into creating this friendship. And I hope they're still friends today. But those are the kind of things that give you so much pride and so much happiness, just having created a setting for something like this to actually happen.
It's funny, again, when Jay and I were talking about this, and we say this very often, especially when you're having a bad day at work, that really, no amount of money can make up or match up to the sort of sense of satisfaction you get from seeing people have a great dining experience and come and tell you that, they had one of the best meals, or that you see them coming back again and again. And it's really, that's invaluable. I mean, that's a priceless feeling that no sort of dollar bills can match 100%. Up to. Yeah.
And you need to have someone like that in the business. You also need to have the person who's counting the dollar bills and who's sharp on them.
No, for sure. It's just that, it often gets you through those challenging days. And I think it's something that's unique to this industry. that that instant response that you see in a way, right?
Exactly. That instant response
Yeah.
is so, is
And
such
it's
a
genuine,
crucial
right? Because
thing.
no one, I mean, it's rare that you'll see someone, I mean, if someone doesn't like it and they're paying for something, you'll probably hear about it. So it's 9 times out of 10 it's a real sort of it's a genuine response. And
Yeah, in fact, if they can, they will find a fault, especially in the market that we're in.
But, I mean, tell me now about some of the challenges. I mean, you've talked about scale, and that's something, again, we're in that mode, which we've never been in our 12-year journey until, I think, 2022, where we kind of shifted from survival mode to, growth, and hopefully more of that this year.
So I think, Hoppers Soho, like I said, I probably spent the best part of 2 years every single day on the door. And it's amazing. Still people come back and they're like, we were denied a table then, or we were told to wait 3 hours. I think it was probably me. And some of my closest friends who I have in the industry, because we were really popular with the industry, are people who I met because of that experience there. So I did my share of being very hands-on operational at that point. And like I said, we opened it with a view of, there was no hole in the market or any of that stuff. Obviously, it was there in the background, but it was like, let's just create somewhere where we want to entertain our friends. We want to come in and eat, where we want to have an environment of, these are the people we want to work with and see every day and night, because we'd actually see them.
Mm-hmm.
Because we'd always be on the floor. So Nana would come in on the weekends sometimes and work. We didn't have kids then. So we were very, very hands-on. And once we did that, it obviously blew up. We were very successful. We had a lot of, Arab guests coming in. They're like, oh, we want to take you abroad and all that. So we could have bitten that, then gotten excited and said, okay, let's grow. But we did it in a very slow, measured manner. 2017, so we opened Hoppers Soho 2015, October. 2017, we opened our second site, which was much larger.
And you got a bib gourmand.
We got a bib gourmand first year.
Yeah.
Which was nice, which is really nice to have.
I mean, it's incredible. Come on, it's something that most restaurants will sort of kill for, buy for. So it's a huge endorsement.
I
your
love
first
bibs.
project, your first sort of year of operations. I mean, that's an incredible endorsement.
Yeah, and we got some really nice awards in that year. But then awards is something I'll talk to you about later because you see the ups and downs of awards later. But we got best restaurant, GQ, Square Meal. Evening Standard. We had some amazing reviews that really propelled us. Especially in those days, reviews made a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Today, the world has changed a little bit. But we opened that first one, hugely successful, very busy, a lot of demand. So we knew it's there. And then we opened the second site. So Hoppers Soho was tiny. And then in my head, I was like, okay, I want to open the second site, which was twice the size, over 2 floors. So operationally very different. Little semi-private rooms. We never have private rooms at Hoppers. A semi-private on-looking the main dining room downstairs. But these are tables of 8, 10, 12. And in Hoppers Soho, the maximum you could fit on a table was like 5 people around a table of 2. Because we'd managed to do that sometimes. So for me, that first challenge, so I got in a guy called Savio, who still remains our operations manager. He came in from, great hotel and fine dine backgrounds. He'd never done casual before, so I had to really break that into him. We'd fight all the time, like husband and wife. He's still one of my closest friends and allies. He came into Hoppers Soho for about 2 months. He saw it, and for me, I was like, "This is my first restaurant. This is what I've done. It was successful. I'm going to use the same formula to replicate at St. Christopher's Place, Marylebone." He was like, "No, Karan, it's not going to work." And we fought tooth and nail. In the end, obviously, I made sure I prevailed and I hired the kind of staff. So we would have a lot of actors. We'd have a lot of, part-timers in the team because they added that amazing, when you come to Soho, they added that amazing touch of flair, that personality.
It's a different energy, yeah.
But it's also a tiny restaurant. So if you have to serve 4 dishes, you can actually walk to the kitchen and back 4 times. This is something I underestimated. When we opened Marylebone, it was those kind of guys. And honestly, in the first month, I lost 3/4 of the team. And Savio looked at me, smiled, and he said, "See, I told you so." Then he hired a complete different team. Finally, we found a middle ground. And we had a team of sort of professional servers, waiters, managers, people who wanted to do this as a profession, and the casuals. So we had to balance that personality with the experience. Mm-hmm. Because yes, certain skills can be taught, but you've got to have the people who want to learn those tray skills and basic service skills and efficiency and stuff for that. So that was, I guess, the trickiest thing about opening number 2, where you couldn't just replicate the model. And it taught me a huge amount, where these are less than a mile away from each other. I walk between the two, and that was the whole reason why as well. We wanted to be able, in walking distance, to be able to see all. But the clientele is different. So Hoppers Soho is, most people are below 30. And you've actually got like young 20s, and a lot of them, like it's your cheap first date. And, we have a lot of American crowd. You have this typical Soho crowd that just comes there for a meal and goes to 2 other places. Whereas Marylebone is a little more of that sort of affluent Arab Indian, older market. So now you've got people who sort of, it starts at 25, more 30, it goes up to 70. And you can't treat the people the same way. Plus, they have different expectations. The site looks a little different. It's a little more slick. So suddenly they're expecting different kind of service.
So just the change of neighborhood is what's driven
for
this
me,
different clientele?
It's huge, yeah.
Wow.
And it's fascinating in London.
In Bombay, you would never do, unless you're like a Starbucks, you would never do another restaurant like within a mile of the first one. It's a much smaller audience that everyone's vying
100%,
for. And that's a big risk, right? Doing something that close to your
this
first
was
one.
like opening Lower Parel, and actually not even
like
in Bombay terms.
Like Lower Parel
yeah,
kind
exactly.
of thing.
No, but forget about the distance. It's like having Lower Parel and Bandra.
Yeah.
In a Bombay context, where it's like a 20-minute drive in without traffic.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating, and this was a huge learning experience. And it took about 2 years to get that right. But then we had the World Cup, Cricket World Cup, where people would literally, we have Indian families coming there. They would eat lunch, dinner, and then leave the country after having watched 2 games or whatever it was. And it felt amazing. And it was a very, very different crowd. It was a very different way of having to do it. But for me, the biggest challenge was keeping that ethos, keeping the DNA of Hoppers the same, but also accepting the different clientele and being able to adapt to it. And I respect chains a lot, and I think there's something cool to be said about QSRs and chains, but Hoppers is not one. And that's when I started thinking of it more as a group of restaurants, and they're like siblings. Now I've got 2 of my own kids who look very similar sometimes, but are completely different personalities. So I think that's when my thinking sort of came from a creative point of view, said, okay, fine. There's no point changing them. It's not. So I approach every single site in a completely unique way, saying, okay, fine. Is this, the first question we have is this the kind of neighborhood that Hoppers is? Because Hoppers has some fundamental things that we will always welcome walk-ins. We always want at least 50%, in my ideal world, 100% to be walk-in. But with the larger sites, you have to do bookings. So is it an environment? Is it an area where we will have walk-ins? Is it an area where you have multicultural? Like, we haven't thought about venturing into smaller neighborhoods in London. They have to be fairly busy, where you get a mix of tourists plus locals. You have to have locals in, otherwise your lunches and early evenings and stuff go to the dogs. And there are certain other things about it, like we wouldn't open in a hotel, for example. London hotels are quite different, but it has to be an area with other similar sort of brands and similar sort of things as our ethos from Hoppers Soho. So we go in and we say, okay, this is an area, it ticks that box. But then after that, you approach it in a completely unique way. We're saying, look, now I've got certain things that I want to have as rattan in there. I want to have a lot of the color in there. I want to have honest Sri Lankan references. So the first one was toddy shops from London Soho, from Sri Lanka. The second one was a whole Bawa theme. Jeffrey Bawa is a great architect in Sri Lanka. We have huge respect for what the works he's done. How do we take that and put that into a London context and give it that feel? But keeping in place, things like our Raksha masks, the Sri Lankan masks. So we had colourful touristy ones in Soho. I got commissioned black and white ones that you can't even find in Sri Lanka. Huge ones, along with some of the colourful ones. There's still artwork on the walls, which is quite kitsch. Which is quite, you have graffiti and you have that kind of stuff. And then obviously so having done that, and then that was very successful because of the World Cup, and then the sort of popularity got after, we said, okay, we prove the concept now, because it wasn't just a fluke success in a tiny site in Soho, which would always be busy. We could actually, from 40 seats, we went to about 80, 90 seats, and we've proven that it can be successful. Then in 2019, actually from 2018, we started talking about this opportunity in King's Cross, and it took about 2 years to get the site right.
I remember when I was there,
phenomenal area.
And it was
it was dodgy.
Unsafe, exactly.
Not slightly, very unsafe. Yeah.
Around there, but it's gentrified completely.
And it's done up in a beautiful way. So the developments there have actually kept the essence of King's Cross. So you've got Coal Drops Yard, and it's called Coal Drops Yard because that's where the trains used to come and pick up coal from. drop coal and then pick up coal because they're all steam engines. And then you've got, some of the other areas that have really kept that essence, and I loved it. So although it was quite different from those really busy areas, we've got certain pockets of busyness. We've got some amazing office. We've got Google, Universal Music, Havas. So some very cool media people around there. And we knew we're going to have to take a very different approach when we open this site. And it's a huge site. So it's even bigger than Marylebone. So now it's like Marylebone and Soho together. Wow. So you've kind of grown a little bit in terms of the size and scale of the spaces. But again, it was like, what are we fundamentally? So there was an element of being like a large dining room, like a canteen, but a cool canteen. There was an element of homeliness with the kind of artwork that I actually go and pick up on trips. I do a trip just to pick up artwork from random places and get it shipped back, because each thing should have a story, even if it doesn't mean anything to anyone else. As long as it means something to you, it keeps you focused, So King's Cross became a bigger project, different project, and it was super exciting creating that space. And then, as luck has it, we blew up for the first month, and then COVID hit.
In Feb 2020, man.
We opened late Feb 2020, and then literally, I was, joking to the team about this whole new Chinese virus. I was like, just be careful if someone comes in on the train because you have tourists coming in and someone's coughing. Just stay away from them and stuff like that. And then in 4 days' time, we were talking about COVID being the most serious thing that's ever happened, and had to shut the restaurant. But then we sort of, the government was very good in terms of grants and stuff within the UK. So that supported us. Our teams were great, and we did our best to keep them sort of motivated. The top team all got together. We already did deliveries at Hoppers, so it wasn't a new thing. But first, we were just like, okay, let's take stock and see where this is going, because there's so much change happening. So we didn't go to any of that immediately. But I think October that year, we launched Cash and Curry. Obviously, a take on the tongue-in-cheek version of Cash and Carry, which are those shops where you go in and you buy stuff in bulk. So Hoppers Cash and Curry was our sort of our cook at home, finish at home brand. And I remember Sunena being pregnant with our second son, and the whole team, like the A team, we had the ops managers, the head chefs, all of us would crowd into Hoppers Soho, and we'd be packing 200-300 boxes a week to ship out. But that was just to stay engaged with the brand. It was so much fun. Obviously, that business to a large extent fell off a cliff edge as soon as lockdown went out and people just were dying to eat out. We've shipped some of them out to one of these consolidating platforms. That's actually keeps that going afloat. For me, it's a very important pillar to have, because I want to be able to spend sizes. Exactly. And there should be somewhere where, across the country, you can get a taste of what we do in a nice way, because I think hot delivery is very different from when you have finish at home.
Ship, across the country?
Across the country, once a week. We do spices. Now we've got the book as part of the package. So Hoppers Cash and Curry came up then and kept us busy. There was a lot of opening and closing, adapting, outdoor dining. People were eating in the freezing cold and enjoying it just because they wanted to meet their friends. So we went through a lot then, and then we came out the other side, and then there was the chaos of Brexit and a political crisis and all that kind of stuff in England, which hasn't helped at all. Yeah. So actually, it's been a very, very hard year in terms of all the upheaval, in terms of recruitment. More the front of house.
Yeah, I think, I haven't been to London for a while, but the last time I went, I remember it was a very different service experience from anything I've experienced. And I sort of very loosely put it down to Brexit, but,
no, Brexit,
would that be a fair assumption?
Brexit has had a huge impact. Brexit has had a huge impact psychologically, and COVID has had a huge impact. I don't know if you found that here, but, for the first time, people realize that, and it's a good thing in many ways, but like a lot of these professions that took a lot from you, and not everyone loves it the way we do. We hope that we can inculcate a culture in our spaces, in our restaurants, in our brands where people love it as much as us. But the reality is that some of the people are not going to, and they're just doing it as a backup or a means or whatever it might be. And I think that's what happened, that people suddenly realize that I am not my job and my job is not me. Like, I love that. For me, my brand is me and I am my brand, and I eat, sleep, live, breathe that, and it's the same about you. But you can understand how, people working the grunt, coming day in and day out, not loving it, is very hard. Same with people in airlines. Some of the other sort of grunt jobs out there, which just require a lot of work, a lot of physical work, perspective.
Actually think it's
exactly. I mean, in London, you had a little bit of free cash as well for doing nothing, right? Yeah. In a sense. And I think that just allowed people to say, actually, I'm not wedded to this job and I can survive without this job. Let me get creative. Let me do certain things. Huge, opportunities came out of it for people. And I'm actually happy for some of them who left. But then we had the perfect storm of Brexit, where a lot of our European staff would be coming in and doing work that, we didn't have the staff for, the demand for in England. But unfortunately, because of COVID, people changing their mindsets, Brexit on top of that, and everything else that was going on. And, now we've got a major cost crisis where everything has become expensive, partly because of Brexit, partly because of the war in Ukraine and all that stuff, and inflation and all of that stuff. So it's been really hard. We're squeezed from all ends. And, sometimes you just wonder, is like, how do you keep this running in a somewhat profitable sense?
I was hoping you would give me the recipe for that, because that's something that, I think India was very different in one sense, because yes, it was, there were people who came to a certain realization and things, but it also, because they didn't get the handouts, people just snapped back into work as well when they had the first opportunity to do that. And, so it was a little different story
Yes.
here, but it's still a challenge,
Yeah.
And especially now that I feel like, of course, I look at it from a very like Bombay lens, but, given the spurt of restaurants opening now and people coming back into the industry like COVID never happened, there's a huge sort of tug of war for manpower, and I would say that for us is one of our biggest challenges.
Is it?
It's been ever since I've been in the industry, but I think it's gotten exacerbated, of late. So I think it remains the unsolved enigma of hospitality of the industry too. I mean, to some extent, people, there are people who are loyal and who love what they do and they see value in being with you, and of course, you invest in them. But it is still, as you grow, especially, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I see in the business.
And I think that's so we've taken a twofold approach. We've put a somewhat, I wouldn't say a pause, but we've sort of slowed down on the growth plans, just because we want to be realistic about what we can achieve in the next year or two. So we slowed down to it in a sense. And then on the second hand, you have to look at it as a longer term game, where sometimes we say that and, we're guilty of that. Where we say, okay, we want to become this really cool employer. We want to become this place that everyone's really happy about. And then suddenly 4 people leave and everyone's doing, 6 more shifts, and you're not able to give them some of those things that you kind of want to. Exactly. Because it's like, and the only profession that I mean, in our sort of thing, 24/7 hotels are the only ones I look up to. I was like, oh my God, how the hell do they do that? But with us, it never stops. You repair a bathroom or you repair a toilet sometimes, and you've got to find that 2 hours in the middle of the night when a contractor wants to come in and do that, So you're constantly running this race. And at the same time, sometimes, you have people fall down and stuff. You've got to keep running. So that becomes a bigger challenge. And in harder times like this, that whole longer term piece of, staff welfare and doing more and just becoming this place where things can. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario where you don't know how to solve it. But I think that's where we come into play, where you have to take a stand, do certain things that are more long term rather than short term. So it might mean that your staff cost is not in control the way it would have been, but you've got to look at it from a long-term perspective. I'll lose all these people and then I'll have to pay people more salaries and get the wrong people in. So you take those calls.
Absolutely.
And that's what we've been doing. It's a twofold approach.
I know one of the challenges I remember you were very vocal about a few years ago, which was that it's very easy for now people to see your success story and then want a piece of that and think they can replicate that, maybe cheaper and more, just pull your team out and do that. I mean, I'm sure more successful restaurants go through this. Is that still something that bothers you and keeps you up at night?
I think the team, at least in London, the losing team is not something that losing a team member is not something that we worry about, because the culture is actually very strong. And when I say family, like a lot of my top people who the restaurants rely on are very, very close to me. And there's immense loyalty both ways. So that's something, fortunately, again, with the size we're at, obviously, as you grow, that's another huge challenge of how do you then pull yourself out of operations? How do you make yourself less of a micromanager, which is very hard for me to do? How do you then empower people to do what you would have done. And I think that was, a challenge I never spoke about earlier in our chat. But I think for me, getting that right was something that took a long time. I'm not saying I've got it right by any means, but I'm finding my way. And I think the way I've found it is actually we're a surprisingly small team. People think, you're this group of 3 big restaurants and you've got 160 staff members and stuff like that. But actually, it's only like 4 or 5 people who are very, very close to you. You've got to treat them, think of them like family. And, then it works both ways. You cannot have a thing where you just give them and incentivize them by cash. That's the worst thing to do. Obviously, you've got to be there with the money, but you've got to have a lot more than that. And I think we've got that culture. So losing staff is something, fortunately, London, and also there's the poaching culture, but we've always stayed away from it. I've not poached people actively. I've been honest with, friends. I've kept a lot of friends in the industry, whether it's other Indian restaurants, whether it's other restaurants. And we've got a very close community of chefs, many of whom have come in through contacts and stuff. So I'm not that concerned about that. But yes, we have had copycat restaurants to an extent. People say imitation is the greatest form of flattery. I think that's a complete heap of garbage because you get so annoyed when people do that, But I think, again, the last 2-3 years I've changed my thinking on that, matured a little bit, I guess. I used to get really worked up. There's an incident here in this city. I'm not going to name names, but when something like that happened, and I remember us chatting then, and I was also very bored in COVID, so made a little bit of a noise about that. But then, I think today, and this is something Danny Meyer, who's like my restaurant god, his book was the one that made me do it. He's written a foreword in my book, and he's someone I'm very close to. He said, he has this thing about 51%ers. I don't know if you've read Setting the Table, Gauri. I'm sure you have.
It's, I think, every non-restaurateur's Bible before they get into
But
the
I think it
business,
should be a Bible for any entrepreneur or anyone doing a professional job. He's got so many lessons in there. So he talks about this all, for those of you who haven't read it, 51%ers. And he says, when we hire at Union Square Hospitality, one of the greatest American restaurant groups, we look for people, if you've got all the technical capabilities, you're still 49%. That 51% is a gut feel you give me when you walk into the room. And without that 51%, you'll never be 100% higher. So that 51% you need to inculcate into, you need to know and identify, and then you need to inculcate into your people so they're hiring the right people. That's really interesting. Sue and I met him for breakfast in New York at one of his restaurants many, many years ago. And he said, he was talking to us and he said, it's really interesting, this whole 51%er thing. The other day I was invited to a talk. And someone asked me, they're like, in this Instagram age, you can't stop people from taking pictures. And someone will come and take pictures of your menu, your food. And to be honest, Gauri, with YouTube and everything else around, you can reverse engineer any dish you want. So if you came to Hoppers and you ate a dish, I promise you, if you put a little bit of effort into it, you could actually copy it. You don't even need to take a chef from there. And it's the same with any restaurant.
Sure.
So you've got to, that's again, my coming back to food is not the most important, essential thing of the restaurant. It's everything. So he said this, and he said, I then applied this analogy of 51%ers to a restaurant space. And he said, anything you can take a picture of, and this is for Instagram people, anything you can capture on your phone or on your camera is only 49%. That 51% is the heart of a restaurant. And honestly, you cannot agree with that anymore.
Yeah. I mean, as a restaurateur, I think that's it. That's what makes or breaks.
It's the restaurant magic.
Yeah.
It is that essence and soul of a restaurant, like a person. There are people who you, for no reason, and I go by my gut a lot. And I think most creative people do. I'm sure you do. You walk in the room, you do an interview, in 30 seconds, you know if this person's going to work. They could be the best person. They'll work really well, and they might even end up being more successful doing another job. But if you don't get that gut feel, you're never going to resonate with each other. And sometimes I've had that with people who are technically perfect. But there's just something that is not going to fit. I don't see this person a long-term person. Eventually, you just allow them to go. So then I came to realize that. And I think that allowed that whole thing of getting really worked up about someone copying you to subside. And today I'm at a place where to be really, creative and to be doing what we do, I'm always thinking about, so if I've done 10 things, people can copy the 10 things. Even decently,
They can copy your past, but not what's
No one
coming
can copy
up.
what's 11, 12, 13.
Yeah.
And that's what pushes you, in a sense, to always be thinking 11, 12, 13. And I think that's what I'm doing. So the book was one of them, doing other projects, doing collaborations.
I agree.
And now, and after a point when you've built a brand to that level, your brand has a lot of legacy. And I love that, being able to leverage that legacy, because if someone copies you, they're still 100 steps behind you.
100%.
They can reach there. You shouldn't allow them. If you're complacent, then you've allowed them to get up to you and create a legacy. So now there's a lot of it is legacy.
And
so
it's fun, right? I mean, that's now where you can start having fun. You've done the grunt work. You've done the really, like, you know, all the legwork to get to this place. And now it's time to kind of enjoy it. And, you know, you have, I think also when you get to a certain place, you have that freedom to really be creative and not always sort of, you know, worry about like the financial aspect, but also just enjoy it a lot more, enjoy what you've built, right? You know, I feel that way, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I enjoy that bit of just being, you know, okay, let's think what's next, right? So not worry about who's sort of replicating what, and you know, because that's part of being, I think, a successful brand. That's part and parcel of it. But speaking of collaborations, you've done some incredible collaborations with Danny Meyer, you know, with Shake Shack, and so tell us about some of these, and you know, how does this happen, and you know, what do you see as being, you know, collaborations has become quite a buzzword. It's something that I think, you know, it's not just a trend, but I think it's really important to like feed off like-minded, you know, creative people. And as long as it's a win-win for everyone, I think it's a great way to, you know, uplift yourself and, you know, whoever you're working with. But what's it been like, and how do you kind of come up with these?
I think on creative stuff, as in, you know, with Hoppers, we've done the 3 restaurants. We definitely do more in the future. We want a creative challenge, but, you know, you can't keep going in and changing the menus, because people at the end of the day want to come to Hoppers and have the things that they have. So there's a limit to the creativity there. We still use every opportunity to get more creative and do fun stuff. But with that in mind, there came a point when I was like, this exactly the same thing. How do you keep the brand relevant? And not just for the sake of being relevant, but if you genuinely eat, live, sleep, breathe your brand, and you feel it's an extension of you, you've got to stay engaged. Otherwise, just having 3 restaurants, making a round of all 3 of them, seeing the same team coming back, they don't need me to be there. In fact, sometimes I create more trouble being in my restaurants. I tell them, you're losing money every time I'm there because I'm giving free stuff away left, right, center. So I was like, how do I keep myself relevant in a way that's going to benefit the restaurants, benefit these people? So obviously there's a human connect, and I'm connected to all my people, and I have my coffees with them once a week, and I go in and I'll sit around at the bar and watch service, and I'll jump in and give feedback for whatever it's worth. But above and beyond that, that relevance is something that was really important, and it's something that should come from within. It almost comes from a fear of irrelevance, and that initiates a lot of collaboration. So it's not so much, I just want to be there and collaborate. But, you know, over years, you come to respect certain brands, certain people behind the brands. Like I said, you know, Danny was a no-brainer. But it wasn't even Danny. It was Mark Rosati, who is the head of Shake Shack Culinary. He came up to me one day at Taste of London. We were doing a festival, and we take on as many festivals as we can. Again, it gives the team a way to see the success we've created outside the restaurant spaces. That allows chefs to come out of the kitchens, engage with guests coming in, see the queues outside our stalls, have some fun in the afternoon. So that's what keeps them engaged. So we do a lot of festivals. These then bring up new opportunities. So Mark came up to me. He was dressed in his apron, in his chef jacket, looked like this young guy who sort of lost a little bit, thick American accent, walks up to me in the break at Taste of London, and he's like, I'm here, I've heard lots about Hoppers. And we started chatting, and I was like, where are you? He's like, he was wearing a Shake Shack hat. He's like, yeah, I'm at Shake Shack. I'm just flipping some burgers over there. I said, okay, cool. I'll come in and see you. I've heard about Shake Shack. This is back in the day. I'd eaten there once or twice. Never been to the one in the States. Went in there and said, I met a guy called Mark. Is he around? He's like, oh no, he's gone for a walk. Then I stood around. 10 minutes later, he comes back. Realized this guy's a culinary director of Shake Shack worldwide. I thought he's some intern who's just come in to set up one of the restaurants. Not an intern, but some junior level guy. And I love that about him. Because another thing about me, I love getting my hands dirty. If I tell guys to do it, I might not do it as well as them. That's why you hire people. But I should understand how things are done. So I'm in the kitchen. I'm on the front. I try and lead by example, or at least stand at the front line for whatever that might mean. And I think I love that about Mark. So on day one, we just became... I loved his values, and we've been really good friends throughout. And, it started off as a random conversation in lockdown where I picked up the phone and I said, mate, I've not heard from you in so long. How's life? Chatted through stuff. They had started doing a DIY burger at home. We had done cash and curry. I was like, actually, let's do something together. So we came up with the entire plan. which wouldn't have happened. They're a public limited company. They take a long time to come up with plans. We came up with the whole thing, and then suddenly we just said, actually, this seems wrong, because why the hell are we doing this remotely? When we do it, we should be two of us actually serving those burgers in the same place and enjoying it and seeing this. It's like sending a box to someone's house is no fun, you know? So we parked the idea and we said, as soon as COVID drops, as soon as these restaurants reopen, let's do something. And we picked the idea up. We did it in Covent Garden for 2 days. There was no commercial, this thing. We actually sold the burgers only for 2 days, but we spent so much on that. I mean, they spent so much on the collaboration. But for me, it was unbelievable. And then the whole team in the US was very jealous. So they're like, we need to find a way to get you there. So then we did a second round with The Infatuation at a festival in New York in October.
Fun.
And I think we'll do many more. But,
Amazing.
you know, this is the kind of collaboration. For me, collaboration is not, and I distinguish between, and we were talking about this earlier, between a takeover and collaboration. Takeover is just a pain in the ass. Like, you know, you're taking your stuff, going into someone's kitchen, taking over their kitchen and going in and doing your thing. Yes, there'll be people who come for it, but what do you learn from it? Whereas a collaboration for me should be, I look at your menu first, you look at mine, then we see where there's a synergy, and not just a fake synergy, but a real synergy. And for that, you need to actually connect with
the person
of the brand, but the people on the ground. So first thing I do is always, anyone pitches me a collaboration, I want to talk to your chef. Because we could have a great conversation on a car drive, but your chef might not be on board. And I should never feel like I'm walking into his home and telling him what to do or just taking over, because that's a big insult. So I will then talk to him or her, and then we'll come up with a menu which is, you know, a way in which your signatures, my signatures work together. I'm learning a bunch of things. I always take the team along so they learn and appreciate what, you know, different things are. Then we can bring some of those ideas back to the restaurants or not, just have a good time. And I think that's the whole point of collaboration. So we've done many of them out of... We did something at the Shed, which is Tom Kerridge's private dining space, just 8 seats or 12 seats it was in the end, which is like a little domestic kitchen, but it's a 2 Michelin star restaurant.
Wow.
And this was hugely, you know, scary for me, because he was like, you know, his head chef, his exec chef became a good friend at one of their festivals. We do pub in the park. He became a good friend. He said, listen, I love your food. I've eaten it for so many years. Why don't you come over to the Shed? I was like, it's 2 Michelin star chef inviting me. Doesn't know I'm not even a trained chef. But let's just play along with this and see where we get to. And then recreate. I spent about three weeks quietly before even talking to him, creating a menu that I thought would work. He helped me refine it, and we had a phenomenal meal. Then I took the same thing to Thailand when I was invited by a hotel there to do a
Suneva.
bigger meal. Suneva. So I did that. You know, that came up randomly. That was a great holiday for the family. But at the same time, engaging with chefs in a different culture, using Thai ingredients to do stuff in their kitchen. We did a full banana leaf sadhya with, you know, kaffir lime leaf thrown into some things, which works really well with South Indian food because the coconut, kaffir lime, curry leaf. And then we did elevated sort of hoppers experience. So I took all my classics but said, okay, how do I plate them up a little bit? Something I would never do at the restaurants. But again, it's an internal challenge. It was, for me, it becomes a challenge. And having these challenges for my development team, it might seem completely irrelevant developing a pie for Tom Kerridge or developing, you know, something super elevated, fine dine, plated with 19 elements for Suneva. But one of those 19 elements might strike and come back to you and trigger something at Hoppers.
Yeah.
And, you know, people also see it visually. I'm quite active on Instagram and stuff just for fun. It's more like I treat it as a LinkedIn for creatives. You know, people will see it and realize this brand is not just stopped and they're not resting on their laurels, but, you know, it's out there. I heard about it through the most random channel because I was looking at a Suneva newsletter. And I want Hoppers to be that. I want us to be that. Like, we challenge ourselves in slightly sort of risk-free environments as well, but we push ourselves. Every year there's at least 2 or 3 of these things. This year's going to be a lot about the book.
You've definitely challenged yourself with this. That is some serious tome of recipes. I mean, I was flicking through it and, you know, I'm definitely going to be reading a lot of this. I don't know how much I'm going to be cooking because that's not my strong suit, but, you know, it's really a beautiful production. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And it's now available in India. So, but
as of
how
today,
did this happen?
while we're recording.
Yeah.
Again, it was the same thing. It was at 12, 13, 10, 11, 12.
But it's
11,
a pretty
12,
serious
13.
tome. I mean, it's something that, you know, looks like it's taken a lot from you to put together.
It did.
Yeah.
I mean, I always joke about it, but I picked this project up just as we had our second son, who was a terrible sleeper.
Great timing.
Yeah, my wife has heard this a few times, otherwise I wouldn't say this publicly, but it was a way for me to get out of putting him to bed at night. So I'd write from around 10 o'clock to about 3 in the morning for 4 months. But it was a challenge. My first thing when people started talking about cookbooks during COVID, and my first thing was, oh my God, how can I give a recipe away? Then saw the success of some really good cookbooks out there, Dishum being one of them. It's a brand I admire greatly. And I was like, actually, it's not taken away any success, because
It comes back to what you were saying, which is that
you
you
can
just continue
reverse engineer anything.
Yeah, and you continue to create. I mean, you've got to
but also,
it's not-
yes, there are signature recipes,
Yeah.
but are people? Yes, there might be one or two restaurants
and
that
it comes
were
back to
already
that
going to do it.
51%, right? So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And for me, what the exciting thing was then that, okay, so first it was about writing a cookbook. Then I love doing deep dives into subjects I get interested in. So then I did this massive deep dive into publishing, got an agent, pecked his brains properly, and he's become a really good friend, found an editor we did a full auction for the book. There was a lot of interest, which was really flattering. We got a great publisher. We worked with them. We created all this stuff. And then
You did an auction for the book, as in?
so when you come up with the way it works with publishing is we can have a whole separate podcast on this, and hopefully we have a chat
late
one
for
day.
me with a book
we
coming
do
out.
this. We
hopefully
do
this
this.
month.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay,
well,
we'll talk
nothing
about
like
that.
this. So
No, so
yeah.
you create a proposal, and then you go out to the publisher.
Yeah.
So agent helps you do that, and then the publishers come back and say, okay, this is how much we would
your
pay
advance,
for it.
etc. Yeah.
But look, I never got too fussed up about advances, because in advance is just your royalty paid in advance. But in a way, it's a bet the publisher is taking on you. For me, it was more who's going to give me the creative freedom, but at the same time, the support
Yeah.
and the sort of bringing me back online from a publishing view. Because it's a bit like opening Hopper's Marylebone after Soho, where you can have your views on a restaurant. And I brought a lot of that to the book, where there were elements from the restaurant I wanted to capture in the book. So just as the restaurants are siblings, I wanted this to be a new sibling.
Yeah.
If someone in the world who's never heard of Hoppers picks it up, by the end, flicking it through, they should still feel the warmth of Hoppers through design, through aesthetic, through feel.
I mean, I was going to
the
say,
ribbon we have is
yeah.
actually the first tile we sourced for Hoppers Soho. We copied that tile. We did a ribbon. I had to fight. Actually, I didn't have to fight, but to convince them really hard to use that little thing. We got a tactile rattan border, because rattan is something we use in all our restaurants. And then, you see the first page is a
I
full
love
fold
that.
out.
Yeah.
And again, I started questioning myself a lot. It was a lot of introspection. I was like, why would someone buy Sri Lankan? Fine, yes, I've got lucky in London, in a small little area in London, and people are coming to us to eat Sri Lankan food. But why would someone buy a book written by an Indian on Sri Lankan food?
Well, why
And
not?
I didn't want it to be backward looking. I didn't
Yeah.
want it to be like, okay, this is Hoppers, we've created, this is our story, here's our book. Because then you only capture that little market who knows about you. For me, this is an opportunity to be hugely forward thinking. So let's and then I thought a lot. I was like, should it be a Sri Lankan encyclopedia? Like, I've got nothing, I don't have the merit to write that. I know about Sri Lankan food, but I know it in a very small context. I didn't grow up in that city. I mean, I couldn't write one on Bombay today if I wanted to. So then I said, okay, let's actually celebrate this legacy and celebrate what we've done. But also, the way I've done it is basically it's a journey through Sri Lanka via recipes, stories, and everything else, pictures, amazing photos and videos. We've got little QR codes with videos. But it's celebrating that journey that I had as an individual, but also the brand had ever since we first incepted Hoppers in our head. So you'll see friends who we learned recipes from. You'll see friends who we learned but never put those recipes into play because they don't work. You've seen our favorite places in there. And that's why the first page is a sort of fold out of our timeline. And we end by saying there's so much more we wanted to do. So it then becomes a celebration of our journey. And it's almost like, I've always said, it's like a scrapbook of, like, imagine I grew up going to Goa every year. And we'd stay at the same hotel. We'd go as a family of 4. And every year I came back with new memories. And this is exactly the same. It's like going to Sri Lanka. It's like a scrapbook of all my favorite things from there. So little knickknacks, little motifs, little designs. And that's why it's designed in that way as well. We had an amazing designer.
You've got a beautiful
on the
photographer
project.
as well. I mean, it's really...
Ryan is like my younger brother, the photographer. We were very lucky because he's been shooting our trips to Sri Lanka for 5 years. And we could use a lot of those images. We went and created new images. And then he actually came and stayed with me for 3 weeks in London while he did the studio shots. So there's a consistency of photos. But more importantly, he knows
He understands
me.
brand. Yeah.
He knows me. He knows my head. So I just have to say something to him, and and I was standing with him through every single photo that's in the book. So I was I was a massive micromanager on the book.
Amazing. Well, it shows, and it's definitely paid off. Well, you can order this, I'm guessing, online.
Online,
on
I'm
Amazon,
gonna,
where
I
else?
know.
And you can get it at the cafe as of
Yes.
hopefully the next few days. So, come and grab your signed copy there. But it should be available in all the bookstores as well, because you're doing.
I'm
a
going around and doing
yeah.
a crazy whirlwend tour, Bombay. Hopefully they're sending a chopper
hopefully
for
we
me.
bring you back and you cook from it for us.
100%.
And, we actually get to taste this, because I'm sure I can't possibly replicate anything from there like you can. So I can't.
The
wait
idea
to
is we tease you enough to then want to come back to the restaurant for the real
Exactly.
thing, right?
Have a little bit of drool all over the book. No, but this is amazing. Congratulations. And and hopefully we have you back doing a lot more with this. So what's next? What's 2023 got lined up for you?
It's odd because I had two really big projects, the book being one of them, and our international opening being the other, in 22. So 22 was a crazy year, and I've also got lots to be grateful for, the book being one of the biggest things. But this year is I want to spend there's a lot of travel in the first 4 or 5 months. A lot of it is up in the air at the moment, but like you said, I want to come back to India, because now we've got this amazing physical call to action.
Yeah.
And there's so much we can do to actually bring the brand out there. And it's not, yes, it's marketing, but I don't look at it as marketing. I was like spreading the gospel of Sri Lankan food. So another thing that I didn't touch upon earlier, but that COVID got me thinking about, and all of us introspected a lot. And writing the book was a hugely introspective task, because every single word was written by me, and I think I pulled on that whole creative writing from Cathedral and and all our, as lawyers writing dissertations and stuff, so to bring it into the book. And I think that's what really got me thinking about, okay, what excites me in the morning? We've got these 3 restaurants that are successful. People know us, but it's still a drop in the ocean. There's so many successful restaurants. We were talking about awards earlier. Got very excited about the Bib. We got excited about the best restaurants, 5-star reviews. But then in 2 years' time, we dropped off all those, and you'd see new restaurants come in. Like, you're not even invited to these award ceremonies anymore. And I was like, that hurt to begin with. But then I asked myself, I'm still super engaged. I'm still super excited about this, and why? And I think that's when the penny dropped. And I realized that actually one of the most exciting things about Hoppers for me, and keeps me going, is that we have come to represent, in a small way, but we have come to represent a country and a cuisine, Sri Lanka, which is not even a country I grew up in, but I hugely love. I've got more friends there than anywhere in the world, including Bombay. I go back every time I can, unfortunately not as much as I want to, but we have created these ties, and it gives me so much pride when Sri Lankans come to us. And I've made so many friends just because of that. I get a random message saying, Karan, I'm a friend of X. We went there. What you have done for our country is unbelievable. You've given us something to be proud of. And that for me gives me goosebumps today. So how many restaurants can actually say they stand for a country, a nation? You can have the best Italian restaurant, but there are others. But we, in a certain way, in London and maybe across the world as well, we were the first to actually bring it to a forefront, to add a little bit of design and flair and fun to this cuisine. And a lot of people have appreciated that.
Sure.
So for me, that has become a bit of a reason to survive and reason to do
it's
stuff.
like being an ambassador for that country.
So
and
that's
the food,
been really
right?
exciting. And I think, for me, so another thing we did last year was we created our own charity. So we don't run the charity, but it works in tandem with a very well respected charity in Sri Lanka, which is Clean is Clean, very big, some amazing people behind it, and we have tied into it. We created this project called Feeding the Future. We've raised about £100,000 already between April and now to feed children in about 15 schools across 6 districts. The network is about 64 schools, and I want to be able to grow that a lot this year. So for me, charity is going to be a big thing this year. We've raised 100. I want to grow that, multifold, and be able to raise more money, because these are the kind of things that give me real ties to Sri Lanka. You can take a flight and go there and eat some good food and come back, but I want to have
giving back, right?
this sort of link to the real link to Sri Lanka. So I'm planning a trip in Feb, A, to launch the book, B, to do a little bar takeover, but most importantly, to actually go and visit some of these schools that I've not had a chance to visit. So charity is going to be a big part of 23. which will take along, and we'll find ways to make it more exciting. I'd love to bring midday meals to children there, because children and food are two things that I'm very, very passionate about, and would love to.
I can talk to you about this for ages, because I think that's it's the most fundamental foundation for the future of the world, right? Like studying on a hungry stomach is not going to happen.
About it. And when you have kids of your own, you realize the tantrums that they throw, and I was like, these kids just don't deserve that. So when the financial crisis hit, we came up with this charity. So that's going to be a big part of it. There's going to be 2 or 3 good trips. So hopefully the US, back to India to do some cool stuff with the book, and Sri Lanka again, using the book to be able to get to places I wouldn't have gotten to earlier. So there's that. And then obviously there's fun projects brewing in London as well. But many of them, like I said, we've just taken a bit of a pause on. Hopefully we'll resurrect them towards the end of the year.
Fab. Well, this sounds so exciting, and I know I have to let you go, but I'm going to take a quick break and just come back for the last fun segment of the show.
Sure.
Hey folks, this is your host Anubhav Gupta. I want to tell you all about Club Paisa Vaisa. This is a premium tier offering for fans of the show. Members of this club have a few privileges, and let me tell you about them. Members will get access to episodes 3 days prior to the release. Members will get the archival access to all Paisa Vaisa episodes starting from day 1. And the non-members will still get access to the latest 15 episodes. I'll bring you weekly host insights, giving you my personal learnings from each episode on the show, and all of this will come with a completely ad-free experience. Finally, in 2023, we have some exciting plans for new exclusive content that is available only for members. You can go to club.ivmpodcast.com/paisa or click on the link in the description and sign up today. As an introductory offer, it's at ₹699 for a 1-year membership. Note that starting 2023, all Paisa Vaisa episodes will become a part of Club Paisa Vaisa, and the non-members will get access to the latest 15 episodes. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you on the other side.
Cool. So we're back with Karan, and since we've been talking all about the recipe book, I am going to pick his brains for some quick recipes. And side note, Karan, these don't have to happen in the kitchen. So
I'm trying to read over and see the questions
you can't.
from here. Do I get a veto on any questions or more than one?
You can just say you don't know the recipe yet.
Okay, fine.
What's your recipe to deal with stress?
The gym helps a lot. Cooking for me is my number one recipe to deal with stress. It's the only time I don't touch my phone. We have an Amazon Alexa device in the kitchen. So having a little bit of dinner party, just creating a project where it'll be like, okay, I want to today replicate X recipe or be able to cook that. Or sometimes just comfort, I want to do this meal that I really love. And then Sunena will know that day, if she has to get in touch with me, she has to drop into the Alexa and call me on that, because that's the only time where obviously physically your hands are dirty, but that's the only time. It's a bit like meditation, where I actually focus on this, and partly that creative, that kinesthetic, that whole process of creating something from raw ingredients to a finished meal.
Well, on a side note, I love watching your videos, your recipe videos. I'm just like, he makes it look so easy. I could try this. And then obviously common sense sparks very quickly. And I'm like, no, this is not going to happen.
No, I'm
but
sure.
But I love watching, and I know you do a lot with your son. So that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
What's your recipe for success?
I don't know. I don't know if I have it yet, but it's one of those things that you don't think about it. You just keep going. And you actually scare yourself into believing you're not successful, or tomorrow that success will go. And I think COVID was a great way of seeing that. Actually, there are 2 things. One was the project that I was talking to you about earlier, the consultancy project that we had in Scandinavia. When I first went back and worked with the family, we were sort of loose involvement, but that was a restaurant that was sort of wrong place, wrong time, and we knew it was going to be going. Put all our effort into it. It was actually a phenomenal product. Phenomenal team, but eventually had to let go of that. And I think that's always kept me grounded, because closing a restaurant is one of the hardest things you can do. And closing a restaurant before having ever opened one will always keep you scared.
Yeah.
So I kind of wish that on people, as long as you don't lose too much money and don't lose faith. But that was one. And then COVID, just seeing this successful restaurant just suddenly have to close doors and have to deal with all that kind of stuff just keeps you very grounded, because that could happen to anyone, anytime.
So success is a
it's something you don't chase.
Imaginations, yeah.
You don't chase. You just want to be good at what you do, and I think there's an honesty about that.
And
if you do a book, you want to do it.
You set the benchmark higher for yourself every time. So I think that's the recipe for work-life balance. You're a workaholic, so I want to know how you do this.
I think the interesting thing there is I worked in 2 very different careers. I worked in a career which I didn't love at all. And I think there I was always finding that sort of work-life balance was very important. I was like, where is life, where is work? But today for me, life is work and work is life. And I don't say I'm going to work. I'll just say I'm going to the restaurants because it doesn't feel like work. It's an extension of you. And I'm very lucky to be in a position like that because most of the stuff I'm doing, I really enjoy doing, or I have set the seed. I've planted the seed for that thing. So I'm the one sort of leading and pushing people to do it. I'm not in a position where I'm pushed a lot to do stuff. I'm constantly doing stuff. I think it is very important when you have kids. My wife gets really annoyed. Kids sometimes now at an age where they get annoyed, like, please put your phone away. But so much of our work now is done remotely and by the phone.
Oh my God. I'm so happy I'm not the only person who gets shouted at.
You know how it is when your family is this, and especially if you're the creative person, sometimes an idea could come in a shower, it could come on a cycle, right? I actually stop at signals just to write an idea down, and a lot of them are just crap, but one of them will go forward, Or I leave voice notes now, and I think the team hates them, like they're panting while I'm cycling. I cycle between sites and I cycle from home to work, and I'm panting, and I say, I just got this idea before I forget, can you please do this? Or can we start talking about this from next week and stuff? So I think it is a hard one, but I guess, again, you're your certain kind of personality, and I guess you need that as well. So there's a balance there where you need to know when to switch off and how to switch off. I haven't really figured that out too much. But again, having a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old sometimes just forces you to, because there's only so much you can do with 2 hands. So yeah.
Well, and finally, your recipe for your kotu roti. I'm just kidding.
You've got to buy the book for that.
I've got my copy. Listen, what's your message to anyone who wants to get into the restaurant business?
Do it. Spend your time researching it properly. Talk to the right people. Find, you might or might not find a mentor, but just have that faith. Don't copy something. Don't look to fill a gap in the market. Look to create real experiences. Look to create something that's extension of you. If you're not someone who enjoys going for, like crazy fine dine, mad expensive experiences, and you enjoy eating on the streets, create something that replicates that. That's me. Like I can't be sitting down eating a 3-hour meal. I don't like to be tied in. I want to be able to cut my losses. Sometimes I've gone and eaten starters and left a restaurant and gone to Chinatown to finish my meal. So ask yourself what it is, have that introspection. Research it. Don't just go in, blindly, and don't go in because you've been influenced by someone else, and Bombay doesn't have X restaurant. Let's just bring it here, because you might be successful for a while, but you can make a lot more money doing something else. Invest in stocks, invest in something else, and you'll make more money. So don't go in commercially if you don't have that creative heart, or you're not working with someone with a creative heart, because commercially is not the best venture to do. But go in and do it and explore it.
Listen to your gut, no pun intended.
100%. Yeah, exactly.
Karan, it's been so fab having you on the show, and I really, really wish you all the best and huge success with the book, with the restaurants, and everything that 2023 and beyond holds for you.
Thank you, Gauri. And it's been amazing finally making this happen.
I know. Great.